Even the most stubborn Imperials would probably admit that Endor did not go exactly how they hoped, and today we're going to talk about how that might have been avoided, specifically how Grand Admiral Thrawn advised Palpatine to alter his plans. The second Death Star's construction over Endor was a massively expensive undertaking. In an older animated video that I did, I went over one of the related elements which cost massive amounts of credits, the creation of a secret hyperspace lane to reach Endor with the supplies necessary to build the battle station. In the new canon, Timothy Zahn has included more explicit opposition by Thrawn to the Death Star projects because of the massive expenditure, but also because of the single point of failure they could come to represent within the Empire, something that was at least hinted to in older legend sources. For example, in the Hand of Thrawn duology, Moff Dizra is afraid that the so-called Hand of Thrawn was a super weapon that Thrawn could use against the Empire, but Major Groden Tierce notes that super weapons didn't factor into Thrawn's preferred tactics. Despite this opposition though, Thrawn still tried to save the second Death Star before its disastrous destruction over Endor. Beyond its use as a weapon of terror and planetary annihilation, Palpatine saw the second Death Star as an opportunity to lure the rebels out of hiding, to destroy their fleet in one strike. And as we know from Return of the Jedi, this did not go exactly to plan, with the rebels ultimately being able to shut down the shield generator planetside, allowing the fleet in orbit to destroy the Death Star. This came alongside the deaths of Palpatine and Vader, and several important military and political leaders aboard the fully armed and operational battle station, including Moff Jerjerrod and 4 Grand Admirals, sending the remaining Imperial fleet at the battle into disarray, and preventing them from liking this video and subscribing for more. Significantly prior to the battle in the earlier stages of the second Death Star's construction, Emperor Palpatine joined forces under Grand Admiral Zarin in part of a tour of the Outer Rim, during which he met with the future Grand Admiral Thrawn over the forest moon of Endor. Thrawn, though he had not yet been made a Grand Admiral, has still proven himself highly capable to both the Emperor and Darth Vader, and his strategic and tactical opinions were highly valued. Palpatine showed and explained the defenses around the Death Star, particularly the shield generator, to Thrawn, who gave his own opinions on how defenses could be improved. Thrawn first asked if the moon had any inhabitants, and when Palpatine said only primitives lived there, Thrawn suggested that Palpatine burn away all forest within 100 kilometers of the shield generator, and defend it with a single force of AT-ATs, juggernauts, and some smaller support, which would ultimately have required far fewer forces than were already deployed throughout the forest, allowing existing troops to be reassigned elsewhere in the Empire. Unless he somehow expected that the Empire would go through all the effort of relocating the Ewoks first, Thrawn was essentially suggesting that Palpatine burn them all as well. Despite the somewhat cuddlier representation Thrawn got in some later novels, this is pretty in line with what we knew about him originally. In the Thrawn trilogy, we learned that he'd wiped out entire species before when it's necessary to achieve his objectives. Palpatine acknowledged that sure, that's a great idea if you actually want to protect the Death Star, but he revealed to Thrawn that such an impregnable defense was not actually his goal, and too strong of a defense would deter the assault he hoped would come from the rebellion. With that in mind, Thrawn still raised concerns about the Ewoks, warning Palpatine that even seemingly primitive groups can be highly effective in the right circumstances. Thrawn was, as we know, right to be concerned, but Palpatine still dismissed his points. At worst, Palpatine considered them a non-factor, and at best Palpatine believed the Ewoks were so averse to outside contact that they would be equally hostile to the rebellion as to the Empire. To be fair to Palpatine, he was initially correct about this. The Ewoks nearly turned the rebels into dinner when they originally met, but thanks to 3PO, who the Ewoks believed was a god, they were able to join forces with the rebellion and then infiltrate the shield generator, destroy it, and leave Palpatine's fully armed and operational battle station vulnerable. Not that it ended up making much of a difference to him personally, considering he'd already gone down a shaft by the time it blew up. But one of the things I actually find most interesting about this is that the mistake which ended up costing Thrawn his life was fundamentally along the same lines as the one made by Palpatine. Thrawn was killed at the Battle of Bilbringi when his own bodyguard, Rook, assassinates him in revenge for Thrawn and the Empire poisoning his world, Honoghr. Thrawn never doubted the capabilities of the Noghri, given that he regularly used them as an elite commando force, but he and the Empire had assumed they would never figure out that the equipment sent to clean their world was in fact only poisoning it further. There are ultimately a lot of similarities between the Battle of Bilbringi and the Battle of Endor. The leader of the Empire gets killed by their own bodyguard, and then the forces fall into disarray, and Gilad Pellaeon ultimately has to call for a retreat. Only in the case of the Battle of Bilbringi, Thrawn is both the Death Star and the Emperor. That's going to do it for today though. Thank you for watching, and I hope to see you next time.